I'm here today on the meaning code with Tayo, and it's really a blessing to finally have this opportunity to talk on, put it on the internet, on the interwebs, as they say. Um, Tayo and I finally got to meet in person at the Chino conference, and as I understand it, you were also at the conference in Germany.
No, I
No?
wasn't. I was part of the Euro trip, which the
Oh,
Germany trip was part of. Because
okay,
because
you were part of the Europe trip. Okay, yeah. And so any part of that that you want to tell would be fine with me, but I thought it would be great for the listeners to kind of hear your story and have you introduce yourself, and maybe we can play with some ideas.
yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Karen. It's funny because there's a imbalance of you. I know so much about it because I've been watching you while you know nothing about it. At the conference, I was sat with Anthony and Johnny. I was like, oh, there's Karen. And I was like, it was kind of creepy how I was stalking. Look, is she free? No, she's still busy, like just stalking you to try and get a conversation with you. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you. Uh in terms of my story, so I'm Nigerian, and I was trying to get the best way to tell my story, and I think it has to start with like my grandparents on both sides. So on my dad's side, um my grandparents had four kids. My dad is the third, the second son, the third born. But the firstborn died, I think, pretty early. So he had an older sister, and he became the only son because he also had an older sister and a younger sister. Was the only male in the family. Um, and also they lost their parents. Like my dad was a teenager when their parents died. But before
Mm.
they died, the last two children, so my dad and his younger sister, were born in England. Um, I'm not sure if that's like the my grandparents having a foresight of having an escape plan, because for most Nigerians, the plan is to escape and find a better situation outside of the
Mm.
country because of just jobs, corrupt, just yeah, escape plan is the so yeah, they lost my dad lost his parents and his oldest brother, and he became the only man. Um, at some point, that's my grandparents on my dad's side. On my mom's side, my granddad was pastor slash priest slash cult leader. And I say cult
Oh,
leader
wow.
based on the amount of women in his church that I impregnated,
Mm.
which rings cult to me more than church. But my mom was one of many, many children that he had. And my parents met at my mom's dad's church. I think they were both on the choirs and they were flailing around, and that's how I ended up here. Because I am my mom's last born, but my dad's firstborn. And yeah, so that's the context that I was born in. And I think like my birth changed my dad in ways because he left that church. His younger sister was also there with him. It took her out. And by 2000, when I was 5, my dad was able to get he and his little sister, after years of trying, British passports so they could move abroad. Because although they were born in England, they were raised in Nigeria. And when their parents died, things became complicated. So I was dropped off to my dad's older sisters and her husband's family at 5 years old when my dad moved here because my parents went together and my mom was dealing with 6 other kids before me. So it was just to help her with one less mouth to feed. I was living
Okay,
with
can I
my
just
aunt.
ask a question here? So,
Yeah.
so when you were 5, your father and his sister went to England. Did your mother also go with them, or she stayed? Okay.
No,
So,
she at this point they were not together if they were ever
okay, at
really.
this point, she's out of the picture, sort of. And
Yes, or as far as my dad's concerned, yeah, she's out of the picture. And also um I don't have much details, but I've got a feeling that my dad was really involved in like the church that my mom's granddad had, and it sort of went through a deconstruction of sorts.
hmm,
And so that affected their relationship, and yeah. But
sure.
his plan was to he'll go over with his sister, work his way up, and when he can, get me over there with him as soon as possible.
Hmm.
But I remember the day that I got dropped off. I was 5, but I remember it because um, one, it was my birthday, but more importantly, when there's this thing when you're thirsty, hungry, you think back to the food or the drinks that you could have had. When I'm hungry, I think back to a plate of rice that I was offered when I got dropped off, but because I was being a brat, I didn't want to eat it. And I remember still to this day, whenever I get really hungry, I'm like, oh, it would be nice to have that right now. But yeah, so I got dropped off to my auntie and her husband's family. She had 4 kids. The youngest was 8 years older than me, and just they were Christians in the like my uncle was an elder, so we went to church multiple times a week. He was traveling, working for the government, the railway government, which meant that there was no steady income because they didn't pay them on time. So it was a like very odd thing. But she took me and she took my a younger sister, uh, her oldest daughter, also stayed with us. So there were 6 kids that my auntie was having to feed off next to nothing whilst my dad was abroad trying to. So that's the context. Like my first memory of like growing up, growing into my soul was in that context of I've got a dad abroad. I see my mom summer holidays. I'll go spend that with her, and that's how I was introduced to the that side of the family because my dad didn't want me to have anything to do with him, and I
Hmm.
still don't think that he knows that I met my granddad, my mom's dad.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's all sorts going on over there. So yeah, that's the context I grew up in, but churched and uh in this is between 2000 and 2008. There's no in I was living in Ibadan, which is south of Nigeria. Like electricity was infrequent. Like maybe for a couple hours a day you might get it, meaning that I wasn't watching TV. I was outside playing with other kids in the community. That was how I grew up. I read books because there was no TV to watch, and I really loved the biblical stories.
Hmm.
Uh, that really captured my imagination. Yeah, and I was one of those at Sunday school in the church I grew up in my uncle's church. It was actual school, so at the end of the year there would be a test given, and the kids that do well go to like the state level, national level to like compete on Bible question. The
Hmm.
Bible question that was
Hmm.
always chosen to present my denomination or my church in my province. So I was that kid because I just love the story, and yeah, by 2008, my dad, after years of trying, finally got me came over here to live with him. And by this point, he had remarried, and my little brother was born. He was 5 years old when I came over. So I was 13, 12 going on 13, and I was actually another change. And that's the biggest change of all because I'm going from not just a change in the family context, but even in the environmental context. It's everything cultural, everything's different. And of
Hmm.
course, I was introduced to the great internet, which was, um, I mean, I was aware of it, but access to the internet back in Nigeria, you pay for internet cafes, and the cheapest rates are like midnight, so you'll have to camp out, and I get to go with my cousins once in a while. They'll drag me along to, okay, yeah, you can come along. And yeah, so that was my access to the internet. Now it's just there. And as an autodidact, that was probably the worst thing because now there's just combinatory explosion. I was just going into different pockets. And as a young teenager as well. So yeah, all of those wormholes became open, which but at the same time, I was still a Christian. And even in the old internet era, my friends and I in secondary school had like this mini revival go through our school where kids, I think it was triggered by conspiracy videos about the Illuminati and how music influences people. and like we all really bought into it, and our solution was just to fall back on the faith of our parents and the faith that we grew up in. And that was like
So this was
yeah,
your secondary school in the
in
UK.
England. Yeah, I think we were around 14, 15 years old. Year 9, year 10. I don't know what the equivalent is
So do you
in
still
America.
have contact with any of those young people?
Yes, two of them are pastors. One is a missionary in Ghana right now.
So it stuck. I mean, the revival.
For for some, yeah.
Uh-huh.
For some, yes, yes, it did. For a lot of us, it didn't quite stick. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I've been Christian like 3 times because I've said it in this prayer about 50 times as well. So I'm the type to just keep going back. It will stick for a bit, and then I'll find some inconsistent that will make me fall off. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, that was a really impactful one because it was the entire school. And at the same time, Rock Thurrock, which is a ministry of the Billy Graham crusade or sorts. They were in England, and they came to our area, and my friends, my school were like kind of championing, like going to other schools talking about Christ. It was
Mm.
really cool. But at this time, I remember having debate with my science teacher about evolution and how that can't be the explanation for. So yeah, that was fully bought in, and I was under online watching all of the debates, just sold it
Mhm.
into that. Um, and then I went off to college, which I was in college. I found a church straight away. That was one of my priority. And I was actually baptized uh, a year 2 years into my university study. But at the same time, there were all of these new ideas that you're encountering, and
Mhm.
that's another more things for you to try square with the faith talk. And prior to Jordan, I didn't really have the language for why things didn't quite fit. Uh,
Mhm.
because there was no, from my point of view, there was no attempt to try and make them fit. They were always put as opposites that needed to be combated
Mhm.
against each other. Uh, yeah, I think I first ran into Jordan I was around 20, so second year. But I ran into Jordan through my friends that were not fully red pilled, but sort of red pill lights, meaning they are the the manosphere is a space on the internet for men to feel value because the society isn't bringing it. And it encourages you just put yourself up by the bootstrap, like clean up your room, all those sorts of things. And
Mhm.
Jordan's book 12 Rules for Life sort of fell into that. And yeah, I think I I thought that was cool, but I was never into all of those type of things. I was more into the philosophy and spiritual thing. I thought Jordan was just another get rich quick type individual. But then I saw his interview on Rogan where he was talking about God and religion, and that blew my mind. I was like, wait, what? There's a who is this sorcerer speaking things that I knew but didn't know how to say. So that was my introduction to this little corner, but I still didn't engage with the corner until I think early 2020. This was after I graduated and sort of spent a few years just floating. Uh, my degree was in mechanical engineering, and there was a job offer like leading on for my final year project that I didn't even tell my parents about because I knew I was going to reject it, and I didn't want to go into the corporate climbing the ladder because what's the purpose of it all? Um, yeah, when I was doing music, all of this creative type stuff that was not without purpose, but also it was needed. I needed to get out of my system at the point. And around 2019, towards the end of 2019, everyone on social media was doing the decade challenge, where this is where I was 10 years from now, and this is where I am now. And that was like, oh, okay, so we're entering a new decade. I need to sort myself out and see what am I going to make of myself. And around that time, through some uh I would now say probably divine influences, I got interested into stories, and screenwriting became a main tool. And so I was really into that. And towards the end of 2019, going into 2020, I got myself a full-time job where I was like, I'm going to be consistent with this, because prior to that, I would go take a job for 6 weeks and leave and find other ways to make money until I can't, and then go back to a job if I need to. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, go for it. My little brother's interrupted.
Oh,
Yes. So by 2020, I moved. I was trying to learn how to be a screenwriter, and somehow I rediscovered Jordan through his conversation with Peugeot, and that blew my mind. That was I still don't have the language to describe the weeks, months after that conversation, the way the like I was speaking to God, and I was under yeah, it was a spiritual experience that I still don't have the words for. But it was
that was
so
the one, that was one that they had after he first came back from being ill.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the one where Jordan speaks about the narrative and the objective, what we're touching, and saying that
Mhm.
he believes it, but it doesn't know, he don't they know what it means. Yeah, that conversation. I went back to watch the conversation again, and I can't point to what in it made me have the experience that I did, but I'll just say it was a divine thing, a God moment.
Mhm.
And that really made me reassess, okay, how seriously I've always sort of dabbled with this faith thing. I've never been an unbeliever really, but I've never been fully sold under the submission of like a church, because I would always look around and like find ways where the church are inconsistent within themselves, and then use that as an excuse to not go to church. I'm like, okay, I'm done with this church.
Mhm.
And when I found the Peugeot conversation, I then found Paul van der Klee's commentary on that conversation. I think it was a two-part for 3 hours each. And I was sold. It was, yeah, I think I spent the rest of that week just binge watching almost all of Paul's content, which is a lot.
Yes. My God.
At some point, I decided, okay, I might not get through all of them, but I can go through the a rough draft for Sundays, and yeah. So that's how I really found this little corner, and through that found Peugeot, Vervaeke, and both Paul and Jonathan are consistent with their advice: go to church, go to church, go to church. And I was still wrestling with the my a lot of things with like church hurts, things like that. But at some point I said, okay, I'm just gonna lock. I'm just gonna go to a church, and uh I was gonna apply the same strategy I used to stay in employment with church, which is just give it a year of consistency. Just use that as the year challenge. Can you do it for a year and be consistent with it? So I said, just find a church, a local one, some place near where I've got no excuse to say it's too far, I can't get to it. And that's what I did. And after the uh, the first church that I walked into, I was just broken, crying, just completely so taken over by the spirits, to use Christianese terms. And that was like, okay, this whole YouTube conversation that led to this spiritual experience where I'm wrestling with God for weeks, and then there was like a release for it, and that that confirmed my participation in this little corner as more than just a YouTube algorithm find.
Wow. Yeah. So I think that story about going to church is so interesting because you said the thing that had always kind of held you back before were all the inconsistencies in the church. And I think that can be true about any institution, right? And that's because all institutions are made up of people. And even though theoretically in the church, you're dealing with transformed people. They're still people. So one of the things I learned very early on, I was a missionary for a while back in the mid 80s, and being part of a mission organization, when I first got into the organization, I just thought, oh, I'm around all these people who are so spiritual, and this is going to be amazing to be able to just work only with spiritual people and have all these spiritual experiences. And somebody warned me, and they said, the closer you get to the center of any organization, the more you're going to find problems and chaos. And that was certainly true. But that's true of whether it's a company or a business or a church. When you get closer to the center where the power is organized, then all the personal idiosyncrasies and personal sins and habits and all that stuff gets all wound up in there. And yeah, so there's a lot of inconsistencies, but then I'm part of that inconsistency, right? So
that's the point that God had to bring me to. It's like, okay, so your vision is so clear that you can see all this inconsistency, or maybe your vision, you're seeing them because they're right in your own eye, and that's what you're seeing through. And yeah, it's very humbling for God to take me off that pedestal of, oh yeah, I can see through all of this. Also, as well as that, it was I felt of fakeness in the way church people spoke to one another, and not being disingenuous, but being safe, and all just speaking from the saying words from the same 100 word the Christianese offers, and just amen, brother, amen, sister, and all of this. The Bible studies. I love Bible. I've always loved the Bible. So I love. So what do you make of this? But when someone tries to just color a little bit outside of line in the churches I was at previously, they'll be like, "Oh, let's bring you right back. Just right back there. This is what we believe. This is," and we all just have to say, "Yes, this is what we believe." When in reality, I know everyone has got crazy ideas about all of this beliefs that we all assert to, which is why the estuary idea, when I caught up to that point of Paul's conversation, I was like, oh, this is great. I am now attending church, but I'm attending there and finding people that are just, the first thing that strikes me is just people just ready to love on you. And it just, yeah, people of different Christians of different generations. And I was inspired by thinking, oh, these people have been doing wrestling on this walk for years and years, and yeah, it was the people what drew me there. But my complaints were still there. After a few weeks of just crying, the reality settled. But I wasn't shocked by this. I knew what was coming, and being involved in the conversation, this little corner gave me better frames in which to see things back. Things. Am I still clear? I just got notification.
You are. Your picture froze for a minute, but your audible was still good. So I think we're okay.
All right. Okay. All right. So you still pick up. Yeah. The estuary idea I thought was brilliant, because church should be a place where you can have meaningful conversation, and being like the courtyard of a church. So it's not in the building, but it's a place where you can come into and meet Christians, non-Christians, people that want to have conversation about meaningful things. I was sold, and I joined John Vervaake's Estuary Leadership Support Network, ELSNet for short, and with the intent to start an estuary. Yet it took a while. It took until Paul's Euro trip. I used Paul's celebrity to sort of announce, okay, we're going to have an estuary in Manchester, in Birmingham, and just to see what the interests are. And there was a lot, which was weird to me, because I thought I was the only one paying attention to the conversation in this little corner, at least in my areas. And we also had people driving in from faraway places just to be around Paul because he's a celebrity. But just in my local context, we had 6 to 8 people that were consistently interested in meeting up to have conversations. Now selling this to my church was interesting because I needed to explain what it was that this little corner does.
Yeah, that's the difficulty, isn't it?
I really can't wait for Justin's 10-minute video that I can just copy and paste to everyone that asks about estuary or conversations regarding this little corner, because the finding the language for it was was difficult. However, I
Well,
was
but that's one of the reasons I would like to talk to you and some of these other people that have been involved for a few years to have more conversations where we can figure out. As I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, that there's this big thing, and when we try to explain it, we kind of get off into all this stuff. But if we could find simple phrases that capture some essence of it, and then use those phrases as a kind of a springboard to explain more. So kind of like, for example, Jordan Peterson, if you collapse all of maps of meaning into one phrase, what you get is meaning precedes matter. Now, there's a lot in that, but if you said to somebody, meaning precedes matter, then they're going to say, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, now you can start explaining that little thing, right? And you can go off in different directions according to the person you're
got
talking to.
relevance realization.
Yeah, whatever's relevant to that person. And if we find, like, relevance realization is one that's almost too big, because to try to explain that, you have to explain John Vervaeke. That's sort of not happening. So,
Oh
but I
gosh.
think we have to find simple principles that are embedded in the larger thing. Even a simple one like what capsulizes Paul Vanderklay? He loves people. Well, what does it really mean to love people? All the different ways that Paul loves people would be a way to get people to see there's something more here than just these biblical phrases, right? That it shakes down into your life and the way you live your life and all of that kind of thing. So I think we could work on that kind of thing and come up with a little index of phrases that we could use when we're trying to explain what it is that you're all about. Because right now, when somebody asks me, I just kind of go, I don't know how to explain this
Where do I
channel.
start?
Go back and
I
listen to
want to I want to
350
talk to
hours
you
of it.
about that. I want
Okay.
to talk to you about that as well, because I think your channel plays such an interesting role in this sort of ecology of this little corner. But going back to what you just said, that's what brought me to appearing on camera under. I was just one of the many people listening and watching and being fed different people on the algorithm and just consume it. And I realized that most people that I'm watching seems to have a similar feeling that this is something important. And there were when the Just Chatting stream started, I thought it was a good opportunity to like get involved in that conversation to say, okay, what is it that we are doing? Because one of the features of this little corner, it's this little corner talking about this little corner, because we're also fascinated about, okay, so what is this again? But we can't help but be drawn to it. I like the phrases I did, because that will help not just people that we're talking to, but also ourselves. So okay, so these are some of the things that I find valuable and why I'm still paying attention.
Yeah. Well, so keep going. So at this point,
Yes.
you have started
Yeah.
going to church. You've gotten
Yeah.
involved with Estuary.
And
And is your Estuary still going?
it is well, yeah, the one in Manchester still is, and that's going without me. So yeah, when Paul was doing his European trip, I got an estuary in Manchester and Birmingham. I had a test run at both of them, and then around that time, not so long after, my uncle, the one who raised me, he passed away, and I hadn't seen or spoken to him since I left in 2008. So that was and there were other family things that were going on. So I almost sort of disappeared from from this little corner for a while, and even like the people that were at the estuary meetings were sort of reaching out, but I was just uncontactable. I was thinking about traveling back to Nigeria. It was just a lot of things going on at the time. But despite that, there were at the Manchester estuary there were two people that were still willing to keep the estuary going, even if I wasn't there. And a month or so later, I came back to like see emails from them and say, okay, there is real thirst and appetite for estuary here. And that sort of gave me another just like, yeah, there are people that find this important and want to keep this conversation going. And yes, that estuary is still going on. That estuary is the reason why I ended up at Chino, because Liz, a lady from the estuary, was the one that paid for my flight and my tickets to the Chino conference. And even though she couldn't be there because she had family priorities, she paid for both Anthony and I to be there because she thinks the conversation is still is that important and meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a trip because it's thanks to Estuary that I was able to go to an Estuary conference, which that's I guess how God
Yeah.
works. And I was able to meet you and be able to share my story on your channel.
Yeah. So you, this lady from your estuary group made it possible for you and Anthony to attend. And then did you get something out of that conference that you could take back to your group in the UK?
Oh, that's a really good question. And it's one that I've been sort of thinking around since I got back, since I got on the flight at LAX coming back to England. It's just I think firstly the most important thing at the conference I was one of the estuary leaders that held uh that led a team of a group of people in estuary protocols. And at the final estuary night that we had with my group, we asked ourselves that question: what are you taking back to your local context? And one of the there were two brothers that were in my group, deconstructed Christians and just sort of feeling their way back into this whole God business. And he was the older brother was like, I'm just looking after my family, looking after. He was a teacher the kids that he was looking after and just being loving on them better. And I thought that was a good start. So within I was just like, I want to spend more time with my youngest brother or my stepbrother, half brother. Don't know what the right term. My youngest brother, he's he's pretty much he started speaking with an American accent because YouTube taught him how to speak. So he's very much just growing up in this world of online. Most of his friends are online, and he struggles with like in-person interaction. So I
Mm.
thought I'll come back, just spend more time with him, go to the park, play sports with him, just do things with him. That was the main thing. Estuarily, going back to the protocol, I want to start estuary in London because I was living in Manchester, excuse me, hay fever. Yeah, I was living in Manchester, but back in London now, and I've been attending Speakers Corner, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with. It's it's an open space forum for free speech in London, so anyone
That's
can.
what I thought. Yeah, I have heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. I've been attending the last few weeks, and it's it's obvious how far behind people are with the conversation that this little corner is taking part in. They're still speaking and seeing things through the frame of the conversation that the new atheists and the religious people had in the mid 2000s, 2010s. So
Yeah.
it's still very combative, more Falio, Nicaea than Sophia.
Yeah.
And
Still fighting the straw man, right? So, yeah.
yes, exactly. And not just atheists or Christians, Muslim, Christian, Muslim, Christian, Christian. Just the conversation on the whole is like that. But having spent time there and spoken to people, I found that a lot of people are willing to have dialogue instead of debate, and they're willing to uh to actually listen to the other side. Oh, you explain to me what you believe rather than me telling you the strawman version that I've been taught about your beliefs. And I found that to be very enriching. I'm learning more about Islam than I did previously. Uh, even though Nigeria is pretty much it's 50-50 between Islam and Christian. And I had a lot of Islam Muslim friends growing up. I'm seeing it with different eyes now. And I would really like to bring the spirit of Chino to Speaker's Corner.
Mhm.
That's the way the conversations are conducted at the Chino conference. Have that spirit be our Speaker's Corner conversations take place. Now, I don't think that's going to happen overnight or even over a month. But I think by starting estuaries and having Speaker's Corner participants take part in the estuary protocol, I think that might be one of the ways to change the culture of the conversation.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you said the spirit of Chino. The thing that immediately jumped into my mind is, and it might take me a second to connect the dots here, but I had a friend one time who had gotten married when she was away from the faith. And so she married a man who was not a believer. And she came back into the faith after her first child was born because she began to see. You see so much when you're a mother, right? And so she came back into the faith, became very involved in church and Bible study and all that. And at that point, she very much wanted her husband to share in that with her. And he said, well, I will go to church with you, but I'm not going to believe. And so he started attending church with her, and he did that for like 12 years. And she would often say, it's so heartbreaking to me not to be able to share that side of my life with him. And one day I felt led to say, well, why can't you share that part of your life with him? That is who you are. It's not that you have to change him. You don't have to share that part of your life with him in order to change him, in order to fix anything. But if you just speak to him as if you were speaking to me, or speak to him as if you were speaking to any other friend, just be yourself. Just bring your faith into the conversation and treat him as if he is someone who can fully understand what you're saying. Instead of thinking, oh, I have to couch things in certain terms or protect the way that I say it so I don't offend or whatever, you know? And to me, that's what Chino was, because we all came into our estuary groups with the assumption that we could start immediately being who we are. We didn't have to kind of check it out and find out who was on the same page as we were or whatever. We just started with this as if feeling. I'm going to talk as if you're fully capable of understanding what I'm saying and as if you care what I have to say. And I'm going to listen to you as if you have something to say to me. You know, it's this as if thing, right?
And I think that you articulated the spirit that I'm pointing to is there's a trust, there's an assumption of trust from the onset that leaves room for people to come with that openness, that come as you are, come as if that they're not going to be, not that they won't be challenged. I think most people expect it to be challenged, but expect it to be challenged in yeah, expect to be challenged honestly, without being strong and without and expect to be asked questions, because part of the protocol, a big part of the protocol is listening. They were expected that they would be listened to, and a lot of the conversations in a lot of the reason I say Speaker's Corner divulge into debate is because they were assuming that you're not listening to me, so I have to be louder, I have to get my point across. Despite what the good points that you might be making, I need to get my points across because you're not listening to me, so I'm not listening to you. So listening's another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because I'm assuming it's this assumption of trust again. I'm assuming, well, you know, maybe this goes back to the whole risk and trust dynamic. one of the things that I'm always thinking about the paradigm of marriage. So in a marriage, the way I looked at it when I married my husband was that what he mentioned to me, you're taking a big risk by marrying me. Because in order to marry, you have to trust that the other person has your best interests in mind. So you're basically putting yourself in the hands of another person. So you're risking, and at the same time, you're trusting, right? And that's somewhat the same thing that we do when we come to Christ. We're risking, we're saying, okay, I'm gonna give everything into this because ultimately I trust that you're good and that this risk is worth it, right?
Yeah.
And so when you go into a conversation like that, you're going to risk being open because you trust that the other person cares enough about you, but you're also going to risk listening to them because you're not fearful that learning something new is going to destroy you somehow, right? That you can learn something new, you can even adopt something new without it destroying you. Because I remember back, I've been a believer for 40 years. I became a believer when I was 72. So no, 43 years. So
Praise
yeah, it's amazing to me, right? But maybe 20 years ago, I was walking through a bookstore and there's this, I think it was probably Sam Harris, one of Sam Harris's very aggressive. And I hadn't heard anything about the New Atheist. I just saw this book and it had God in the title. And I picked it up because I thought, oh, this might be interesting. And I read like 2 sentences out of it. And it just, it scared me. And I looked at it like a serpent and I thought, I don't even want to know what he thinks because I'm afraid of what it might do to me. And I wrestled with that for a long time afterwards. And I thought, I want to get to the place where I'm not fearful of hearing other ideas because I'm so confident in the trust that I have in the Lord that I don't have to be afraid that somebody else's anger or hostility or bitterness or rage or whatever is going to change that trust relationship that I have, right?
I think what came to mind as you were speaking is Paul Van der Klee really helped me with the frame of if you're secure in your faith, you should be open to dialogue with anyone,
Yeah.
regardless what offensive thing they may say to you.
Mm-hmm.
If your faith is secure, and also another frame is at the end of the day, you stand in front of a judgment of one. Like it's Christ is the ultimate judge, and you will be accountable to him. So if you're facing that daily, which I definitely wasn't, my spiritual practices were at an all-time low at that point. If you're facing that daily judgment, okay, bringing myself in front of Christ, then it's easier to face man and whatever they may have to say. I think thirdly, there's a reason for that, thinking from my perspective, why partly why I was fragile and insecure in my faith and wasn't as open. I mean, debating my science teacher wasn't because I was so secure, it was because I needed to know that there isn't this theory of evolution is not threatening to my faith. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's because of the proposition of tyranny, the tyranny of propositions that John Vervaeke talks about. It's the my way of knowing what is true was purely propositional, and that finding John Vervaeke's 4Ps broke a lot of things open, and it helps people in this corner who are aware of like the 4Ps and 4 different ways of knowing. It helps us to have a bit more trust when people are saying what they believe in. Like we can ask more, investigate more, because the initial assumption is often not correct, and doing more digging into proposition will reveal more of what they are trying to say. And that's a skill that I've learned in this little corner. I think those 4Ps have something to do with it.
So for somebody who's not familiar with this little corner, and there are some people who watch this show who aren't, when you say propositional truth or propositional tyranny, what exactly do you mean?
Um, John Vervaeke's got his theory. I don't know what to describe, but he's got there's 4 P's of knowing, which are propositional, perspectival, procedural,
And the most
uh,
important one,
participation.
participatory.
Of course, yeah. There's always one. The one difference each time, but there's always one that escapes my mind. Yeah. And that's in opposed to the way of knowing that most of us are accompanying to, which is by propositions. We judge our truths by the propositions that we espouse usually, and we base all of
What is propositional truth?
our dogmas would be an example. The dogma of the written dogmas are propositions that a church might espouse to and say this is what we believe. Whereas the procedural would be the rituals that they go through. That's also part of what they believe, and equally as important as well as the proposition that they say. The participation is the most important because that embodies all of the other three. I don't think that might be more Mark than Vervaeke, but I think that is true. I think the participatory knowing is more embodied
Well, so
than
let's take an example. You could say, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor is a proposition.
that
You
proposition.
should love your neighbor. That's a proposition. Now, the procedure is how do you love your neighbor? Right. And so then we have the story of the Good Samaritan, which is that's the
Very
procedure, right? And then the participatory is you have to take that procedural truth and implement it in your life. And then it's participatory. And then perspectival would be when you look at that story, can you see yourself as all the different participants in the story so that you get all the various perspectives? So can you see yourself as the priest that's walking on the other side of the street because he doesn't want to be bothered by the wounded man? Or can you see yourself as the wounded man? Can you see yourself as the innkeeper? Can you see yourself as the Samaritan? So that's all the different perspectives. And that's part of what you get when you're like in an estuary group, or theoretically it would be what you get when you're in a Bible study, where you would hear all the various perspectives of how different people, like I had the real blessing when I was a new believer of being in a very small church that had originally been an old-fashioned Friends church. And the Friends denomination in early days was one in which people would sit and wait for the Lord. So they didn't have an actual service, but they would gather together and they would wait individually to hear from the Lord. And then various people would share, this is what the Lord is giving me. So by the time I got there, they had a pastor, they had a service. I became a Christian in that church and I was in the Bible studies, but the Bible studies were often, we would read the scripture together, we'd read a verse, and then we would sit for a moment with it. And, how do you see that? How do you see it? What comes up for you when you read this verse? Can you see how it fits in your life? Can you see how it might change you? And so it was never somebody top down telling us this is what you have to think. It was always let the Holy
my
Spirit speak to all of us and then let us gather around this truth that we discover. And of course, there was always a seasoned believer there in case we'd go off in some weird direction. But it was a great way to get started because it sort of helped me understand that there's a lot in the scripture that just goes deeper, 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 right?
what you just said just now about there being a seasoned Christian there, helping make sure you're not going too far off, but also there's an affordance of flexibility for you to move around, so it's
Mhm.
not too rigid. I
Yeah.
think that's a good description for how I would like to conceptualize estuary. However, I don't feel capable of being the person to decide whether or not this is out of bounds. And I don't, that's one of the my questions about this little corner. Is there an out of bounds as far as this little corner is concerned? And how do we figure that out?
Well, that's a good question, because does estuary have a different goal fundamentally than a Bible study? And I think it does. Yeah, that'd be a good question to ask Paul what he thinks
No,
about that, because
uh,
in a Bible study we are wow, that goes deep. There's many different avenues to that, right? And
isn't
in
that
an estuary group, I'm assuming that the goal is you're seeking truth, seeking
in
to discover some perspective on truth. Would that be correct? I haven't taken the leadership
I'm
estuary.
pretty sure I've not checked in a while, but I'm pretty sure in the Estuary protocol document uh I that I received when I first joined Elsnets, the ultimate goal of it seems to be friendship.
Okay.
That's that's the telos. And that's also partly why I felt comfortable to leave the Manchester Estuary, because there were real friendship deep enough that you get paid for flights to America. So the
Hmm.
friendship had developed because we had repetition, there was conversation, and there was trust developed between. I
Hmm.
mean, I was the only Christian there, and yeah, so I think friendship is the telos according to the protocol. But in terms of the individual or each meeting, you're not going to develop a friendship over just one interaction. So each meeting still needs a go. And I think truth might be it, or at least the freedom to play, which relates to what the role I see your channel playing in this little corner, playing with ideas. You said at the estuary in Chino, you just got straight to it, and you got straight to it because you're able to trust that you can speak about things that's at the edge of what you're able to vocalize, and trust that there will be people to catch what you're saying, see what's meaningful in it, and help you frame what you're trying to say better.
Hmm. That's an interesting perspective on it. Yeah.
And I think that's what you do, Karen. That's your every conversation that I've seen. I've not watched all of your videos, which I don't think I could, but all of the ones that I've really enjoyed are you allowing a space for scientists like the Vervaeke and Michael Levin conversation. You brought Michael Levin on his biological scale, cognitive, and they were both playing with ideas and finding ways in which their ideas are similar, out there different, and it's a really, if you can keep up, which I often can't, but it's a really fun. Yeah, play is the word that the best word I can think to use for it. Playing with ideas and molding and shaping ideas together.
That's an interesting frame. I just had a conversation yesterday with a young man who is a circuit designer, electrical engineer. And he was talking about this whole idea of play, kind of the way his mind works is that he's always playing with ideas in his mind. And as he's playing with these ideas, the the rules of the game that he's playing become apparent to him. And then those rules are a kind of a formula. And then that formula helps him to understand deeper things and sort of develop categories of truth to fit
Hmm.
into that set of rules. I mean, I didn't see this immediately when I was talking to him, but since I had the conversation with him, that sort of crystallized for me. So I can kind of see that happening. And it's very, very interesting because I think that's why I have the perspective that I have on how the cosmos came into being, is that through playing with all the ideas related to the making of art, I realized that there is not a set of rules, but there's a set of principles that are sort of underlying, guiding everything. And that I think those principles guide all the motions of the planets and the way that plants grow and the way that animals grow and all. I think those principles are underlying all of that. The very same principles that are used in developing a work of art, which says to me that the whole cosmos is like a work of art. And the only reason artists can do art is because they've somehow tapped into this set of principles that ultimately create beauty.
Yeah, tuning into the right frequency. I think one of the best conversations you've had was the one with Justin Wells, where he spoke about his story archetypes, and you were linking that back to the way you see art. I thought that was a masterful conversation.
Oh, I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to that one. Yeah, Justin is a really easy person to talk to. I really enjoyed meeting him at Chino because we were bouncing ideas back and forth all the time while we were listening to the speakers and everything. And it was like, wow, yeah, he's gone really deep into the whole story narrative thing since he got back. Are you on Twitter?
Yes,
Yeah.
his threads are epic.
Yeah.
It's almost Matthew Pajot level.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wish I lived in LA. If there would be any good reason to live in the LA area, it would be because I think he's going to put together maybe not an estuary, but maybe just some kind of small community get together where people that live down in that area can talk once in a while.
That would be so awesome. Yeah, I was telling Anthony we did like a debrief when we got back. I was envious of of Americans when the Chino conference was announced because I just thought there was no way I was going to be able to attend. But being able to be there, and I knew there would be combinatorial explosion with like which conversation to take part in. But I had a very short list of people that I needed to track and have a conversation with. You and Justin were both on that list because, yeah. And Justin, I had spoken to, I was part of in his documentary filmmaking class briefly. So I knew that he was had the ideas a minute.
Yeah, yeah. And he's working on this documentary on how housing and space, how the kind of housing that we build and the kind of spaces that we build, it kind of identifies something about the way we think and how the modern housing trend is so damaging, right? I think it's going to be a terrific documentary.
Yeah, I cannot wait for that. I've got a friend who's she started a business in England and she's moving trying to scale it in Nigeria, and she's got this dream of redesigning houses and urban planning in a way that would be beneficial to communities. So I'm very interested in that documentary for that reason.
Well, and the other day, somebody mentioned in the comments on my channel that they thought I should try to get a mashup between Neil Gershenfeld and Moshe Safdie. And the names sounded kind of familiar to me. And then I remembered, oh, Neil Gershenfeld is that guy that had the talk recently with Lex Friedman. He is, I'm not sure what to call him, but he's a teacher, and all of his students are working on design and building things various ways. And he's got tiny robotics that are self-actuating and they can build themselves and then get bigger and bigger. And I mean, it's a little freaky. But then this Moshe Safdie is a guy who back in the 60s, when he was just a young man, he came up with this new design for housing, and it became part of the World Fair that took place in Canada, I think. And he won some sort of a prize, and they actually tried to implement it at the time, but they didn't implement it well because they didn't put enough money into it. And so it never kind of went anywhere. But just recently, somebody realized, wait a minute, they could take this idea and they could do it virtually online and see what it would have been if it had been done properly. And so they built a whole virtual,
Virtually as a simulation or as
just online, just online. They did like a documentary, but they used all the, all the software so that you could visualize what this place would have looked like. And it's just amazing. You should look it up, Moshe Safdie. His stuff might be helpful to your friend because it's very open work, but it's based on the idea that every living unit should have its own space and its own air and its own sunlight. And then it provides these community spaces that also have sunlight. And
I've attempted like 3 spellings, opened
yeah, so Safdie is Safdie, I think.
Okay.
Moshe Safdie. And then just look up housing or something like that. Moshe Safdie housing. And I'll put it in the information section too.
Right, thank you.
Anyway, I told Justin about it because I said, you would be a much better one to talk to this guy about housing than I would, because you've got your documentary, right? And then you could, and he said, well, right now, he said, I'm just putting in 24/7 on this documentary for Estuary because it's a lot more work than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I told him at the comment, I was like, do you know how big a challenge you're taking on?
I know.
Trying to sum up Estuary in 10 minutes.
Yeah, try to sum up 25,000 hours of video or something in 10 minutes. Because the cool thing is there's always something new coming up. Like today, before I got on with you, I was watching Jonathan Pajot having a conversation with Jordan Hall about the biblical perspective on AI, and just off the hook, good stuff, man.
That's you mentioned Lex Friedman earlier, and it's funny. That's the role that my YouTube algorithm has assigned you in this little corner, because when I'm watching a Carol Wong video, there's always a Lex Friedman recommendation next to it. Oh. Because I don't know how you manage to do it, but you go out and you learn, you discover these intellectuals that have got really interesting ideas, and you find you build a bridge to out there connected to this little corner, and then you have them on your channel, have a conversation with them, asking questions that's the role you play. You bring new idea, refresh the Estuary, bringing new people into it.
Well, like I think probably Lex Friedman got on your algorithm because of all the stuff I originally tapped from him on Stephen Wolfram's ideas.
I've struggled to get into that. I've attempted watching a few of your dialogues with him, and I sort of have like a soundtrack of what is saying, but I need to go deeper dive. But another thing with your channel is when I take a Carry One meaning code video, I treat it like homework. I've got my notepad out, I've got tabs open, because I know there will be some new idea that I'll encounter, but like, okay, I've never heard of this before. Let me go do quick research. But that's fun. That's what I mean by the playing of the ideas. You smash things into each other, new things come out.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I think part of it is because I had the initial idea of what's going on. So then if I hear something that fits that paradigm, even if it's over here in, like this morning, I was listening to some guy talk about a new development in the studies on developing corn plants that can generate their own nitrogen, so you don't have to add nitrogen fertilizer to the soil. And the way that they've discovered that certain corn plants can do this, they've gone back to the old heritage corn plants from way, way, way back. And those corn plants had within them bacteria, a certain microbiome of bacteria that had nitrogen generating properties. And so if they inject those bacteria from the old corn plants into modern corn plants, they can get the modern corn plants to generate their own nitrogen. like, I'm listening to this and this is amazing. But one of the things he said was that they discovered that the roots of the plants, as they're going down, the leading tip of the root has a negative charge. And then they think that they're not exactly sure how this works, but they think that bacteria has a positive charge. Well, of course, when I heard that, I thought immediately about Mike 11 and all his cells and how the electrical charge is used to direct functions that the cells are operating, right? But then it also made me think, well, if the root end is got the negative charge, then do the leading shoots going up also have a charge? And that made me think about Michael Claridge, this guy with the electric universe, who says that the sun and all the stars are not primarily just burning balls of fire, of hydrogen and helium, but that they are electrical generators in some sense or other, and they're all connected via electrical connections. Now, this whole electric universe thing is a little bit out there, but there are a lot of different scientists that have signed on to the project. So I don't know, but could there be some sort of electric matrix that's out in the universe that affects the way things grow? I don't know. But I mean, that's one of the things I'd like to kind of look into, because it does seem like growing things are growing into some environment that acts back on the growing thing to guide how much it grows and what direction it grows and all that kind of thing.
It's I'm just picturing Vervaeke doing this. Emanation dance.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're pointing to. But what you've just done there is the magic of Karen. It's this idea here. But yeah, there was also this idea here. What's about what? How do things fit in each other? And I think it's brilliant. I love that.
Well, it may be a sign of a sick mind. Who knows?
Sort of a creative mind, which isn't far of a sick mind. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe a sick mind, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, but it does mean that I'm frantically trying to keep up with stuff all the time, because I do try to be prepared before I talk to anybody who's knowledgeable about any of these things, because I don't know anything. I mean, all I know are the things that I've heard and the things that I've read to try to prepare for it, but I don't have like, my husband is a techie, and over the course of his career, he's been through telecommunications, and then routing, and then networking, and then chips. And then from chips, he's gone into Wi-Fi. So he's covered pretty much the whole industry. And the way that he did that is
have you had a question with me on your channel, or is it off the channel? Because it sounds like someone that should be having input into.
I've talked to him before about I said, you should really do this with me, because
especially with the AI conversation being so prominent, he's been at the ground level for multiple phases of the development that we're heading into.
Oh, yeah, there was even one point at which he was thinking about jumping ship from the company that he was at the time, and he did a lot of study on AI to try to see if he wanted to move into that arena. But my point was that he got a degree in mechanical engineering, which back in the day was kind of a dead end degree. Mechanical engineering is more important now because of robotics. But 30 years ago, a mechanical engineering degree was kind of a dead end, and he didn't really realize it when he took it. So he was trying to do that kind of stuff and ended up working for a lot of dead end things like the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which was like a big government agency with nobody ever doing anything. I hope that doesn't upset anybody. But anyway,
of course it will. Someone will be upset by it.
Every time he made a move from then on, he would read a book, and he would learn the new technology just from reading a book. And by the time he got 3 or 4 levels up, and he's getting ready to go to an interview on, say, routing or something, and he's reading this book. And I said, how can you even understand this? It's all acronyms. It's all technical language. It's all formulas and stuff. has nothing to do with what you learned in school. And he said, well, but the point is, I had the foundation. And then I read a book, and then that foundation fitted in with that next level. And then, so he's building on something, but I don't have anything to build on because my degree was in English and drama. And then my master's degree was in linguistics. So I have nothing to build on. But 5 years ago, I heard Jordan Peterson, and he, in order to make his point, he had to bring in everything: biology, chemistry, philosophy, developmental psychology, neuroscience, all that. And I thought, I need to understand something about all those things if I'm going to play in that sandbox, right? So
one of the functions of people in this little corner, which is very apparent speaking to people at Chino, is the autodidact thing. There's a real sense of seekers of truth. I know that sounds cringe and a little bit cliche, but there is a real sense of that. People that are like, okay, I need to know what these things caught my attention. I would like to figure out why these things caught my attention. And I don't know if it's everyone in this little corner, but it's a big potential of people in this little corner.
yeah, no, that would be a good way to frame things. Like you said, seekers of truth is a little bit cringy.
It's so cringe. I felt that came out of my mouth.
But but that is because one of the things that first caught my attention when Jordan Peterson was doing the biblical series, he talked about how there's this phenomenon of there's a little thing glimmering out in front of you that catches your attention, and you move towards that. And he said the only way you can effectively move towards it is if you have the highest vision of which you can conceive, and then that brings into the range of your sight the things that you need in order to move forward towards this goal. But that little thing that's shining out in the distance is actually your future calling you forward. And I thought that was such an intriguing idea, because that's kind of the way God works in our lives. He's always building us. He's using our current circumstance, whether it's painful or happy or educational or whatever our current circumstance is, he's using that to build us for the next moment and for the next moment and the next moment, because there's something calling us forward. We're being the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. That is the thing that's calling us forward always. So to try to understand what that is, so we know what direction to go, right?
A big part of my journey in this little corner that I forgot to mention was, whilst I was doing the wrestling and God having this profound spiritual experiences, one of the real guidance that people that gave me perspective was Wright, and his insistence that the resurrection and that heaven is not a place that we're going to after we're there. It's a place that's going to be brought onto earth now, and we are currently working as servants of the kingdom now. And that's the similar thing that you're pointing to. There's a calling forward of a promise of the kingdom to come, but whilst you're here, you're still working towards that kingdom, and it's that kingdom to come that's calling, that's giving you a pull towards the ideal. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It reminds me, my older daughter went to Moody Bible Institute for her college. And this was back in the 70s. No, I'm sorry. She was born in the 70s. This was back in the late 80s. She was at Moody Bible Institute. And one of her professors, and I've been trying to find this book ever since, because she told me about this book that she was reading that she just found so powerful. And the author's last name was it was something like Billingsley or Bellingham or something like that. But the idea of the book was that we are in training for our roles in heaven, that we have roles in heaven, and that our life here is a training for that. And I would love to get that book and read it, because I never read it. She told me about it, right? And so I've been
Yeah,
thinking about it a lot. So if anybody knows what that book is, please put it in
the
the comments.
I will be checking the comments for that book because
Yeah.
that sounds like the I was getting in their spiritual wrestling with God week that it was that was the clarity that I had a clarity on love, like that truly love is the highest ideal, and practicing I need to be doing the reps to be of practicing that what it means to be loving now, because that's what I'll spend eternity doing. And it's that role that how that's being done. Yeah. So if you find that book, please, I would love to take a read.
And so one of the practical ways that you're doing that is by being there for your brothers, and loving them, right?
Yes,
How
which
many siblings do you have?
I've got three younger siblings and six older ones, but I'm much closer to the younger ones than the older ones
Uh-huh.
because the older
Yeah.
ones are also they're still in Nigeria
Uh-huh.
and I left a while ago.
Yeah. Well, and the younger the ones are the ones that, especially in the way that the world is going now. I mean, you grew up in difficult circumstances, a challenging environment, but you had the blessing of not being tethered to a cell phone.
I really did, and I was speaking to one of my childhood friends back in Nigeria, and one my childhood memory consists of church because we spent a lot of time. It is always some crusade, some that we're going to. School because education was the most important thing, but climbing trees was a close third because I spent a lot of time just yeah, leave the house, climbing trees, finding fruit on the trees with my friends, and go play football and come back late at night. What have you eat? We found food somewhere, and that was every day. When you're not at school, it's just going out and being playing in with your friends and having community. So I am so blessed. That was one of the biggest culture shock was moving here and finding out that you're not you don't spend the evenings gossiping with your neighbor from the front garden because that's just what communities did where I came from. You know your neighbors, you're friends with them. You need to borrow a cup of a little bit of salt. You go to the neighbors. So that was a little bit of a taking time to get used to. Thankfully, my direct neighbor was two elderly couples that we were friends with, but they were the only people in the neighborhood that we were really friends with. And in Nigeria, it's the opposite. Everyone knows everyone else's business, which is God, it's good and it's bad, but it's community.
That was one of the biggest shocks for me moving to California too. I mean, I had the buffer of in between living in Iowa in a small town where part of being part of the church was that you knew everybody in the church, and you did things together, and you go hang out at each other's houses, and it was perfectly okay to call up or not call up and just drop by and visit
Yeah,
people. But then I was in Japan for 3 years, and then I moved to California. In California, if you can't book it out 6 weeks in advance, you're not going to get together because everybody is just busy all the time. And you have to be so intentional about maintaining community. It's almost impossible. So then church becomes super important because at least on Sunday and at church activities, you're together, right? And we have a small group in our home that meets every 2 weeks. And so we really make that a priority in the way we schedule our time and everything else to be prepared for that, and try to keep in touch with all the people in the small group in between times. But it's really hard when you live, and I'm sure London is the same way. I mean, there's just no connection. You have to be very intentional about it.
yeah, you do. Yeah, intentional is the key word. It's funny you said it's rude to drop by without calling. in Nigeria, it's rude to be around the neighborhood, like around the vicinity, not drop by. If you're around the area, you have to come say hello. So that complete opposite.
So there must be something really wonderful about the Nigerian culture. You said even though there's a lot of corruption there and a lot of problems, but everybody I've met from Nigeria is just like you, just wonderful, happy, loving. What is that?
Well, you've met the right ones, I suppose. Because I promise you, we've got our own bad, just like any other place.
Well,
Um,
maybe because most of the
culturally,
people that I would meet from Nigeria are Christians, that I meet them because they've come to the church or something like that. Yeah.
yes, that's the Christianity in Nigeria is it's a very interesting. It's everywhere. You could not go. It's multiple churches on every street. It's that, but it's also to the point where, going using my maternal granddad as an example, there's a
Mm.
lot of scams going on. It's it's popular and it's popular for a reason. So there'll
Mm.
be crooks getting
So
in on it.
it can be more like some of them are more like a social club, some of them are more like because I'm a good speaker and I'm charismatic, I can get you under my control. So I mean, there's
Exactly.
a lot of different things going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there is, and which the Muslim side, the Nigeria is split into like mainly into north and south, and north is very much the Muslim side, and south is mostly Christian with some Muslim. The the northern Muslims are the wrong sort of Muslims. They are it's a lot of just targeting Christians, endless persecution. That's just constant. It's a part of the. Whereas in the south, it's mostly Christians with some Muslims, but there's more. It's more. There's more unity between the two. It's more harmonious. So
Mhm.
it's a very interesting spiritual dynamics going on. But there are still the traditional ancestral religions that will still also play a part.
Yeah. Well, so that kind of puts me in mind of when I first became a Christian back in 1980. Yeah, 1980 I became a Christian. And this is I understand it's a completely different picture, but there's some similarities in that the church where I became a believer was a tiny little gospel preaching church that was out in the country, and it was equidistant from about 5 small towns. And people
Mm,
came from all those towns out to this little church because in those towns, all the other churches weren't really preaching the gospel. They were social clubs. You belonged because it gave you a name in the community, or, if you were going to be
yeah,
someone who was respectable, it was expected that you would go to church. Um, but if somebody wanted to hear about Jesus, then they came out to this little country church. And
yeah,
so at that time, the only believers that I knew were the ones that were part of this little country church. And then when I moved to California, there's hardly any believers here. So there's no point in going to church as a social club because you have to call yourself a Christian, but it makes you an outsider, right? So the people who are believers really understand what it's like to be alone, right? To stand
no,
alone and
that's exactly right. I remember in my church, my uncle's church in Nigeria, it was the pastors come and go, but the elders sort of lead. And there's always, even as a kid, I remember there are whichever pastor comes in brings a different spirit with them. And there was one particular one that was just beloved by the entire. I think he was there for less than a year, but everyone was crying when he was leaving because it just had such an impact. And I remember conversations around the dinner table. That's funny because there was no dinner table; it was just sat around the floor having a conversation. about the pastor. My uncle and my cousins were saying how he was very Christ focused, and there was less collections every week compared to the usual, and it was very much about the gospel, which I don't think I understood what it meant, but that rings true, similar to what you said. There are different modes, and even in the same church, I saw like we will have a pastor that's very much about the broader denominations moving forward. So there's a lot of collection to help bring this up to standard, whereas there are some that actually care about the souls of the people that they're leading.
Well, why did he only stay for a year?
Uh I think he got promoted to rather than being a pastor, the word to an apostle, which means he was the head of parish. I don't know the language for it, but different hierarchies. So he was moving up. And it was I think he'd been meaning to, they've been asking him to move up for a while. And it was at our church that I felt like, okay, I can move up to the next level now. And everyone was like, oh, I remember that. I don't know his name, but I remember his face. I remember the day he was leaving, just seeing everyone crying and the emotions that was in there.
Well, that's kind of funny because when I was a missionary, one of the things we had to do for a year before going over to Japan was go to various churches around the country and tell about the mission and try to seek prayer partners and people who would support us financially. And one of the churches we went to, and I won't say what denomination it was, but it was a very large church, and they had a annual mission conference that went on for a week, and we were blessed to be part of that missions conference. And so they housed us for the week with different people in the community. It was just a terrific experience. And the pastor was very dynamic, vital, strong believer. And I had an opportunity to have a conversation with him. And I said, I've never seen a church this large and this dedicated to Christ in your denomination before, because I had by this time become quite familiar with the denominations that are mainly social clubs, what I guess we would call mainline denominations here. And he said, well, he said, it's because I preach Jesus. In our denomination, usually the pastor gets moved every 2 or 3 years to another church. But he said, they don't want me moving because they don't want me carrying the story of Jesus out into the world in this denomination. So they've left me here. It's a demotion to be here. But he said, actually, it gives me this opportunity to preach the gospel to all these people. And so he had this thriving community within this otherwise sort of dead church. And I thought that was really, I mean, the way God works is just very interesting.
That's such a useful reframing on his behalf, to see the demotion as an opportunity, and it got blessed through it.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. It's having the posture of gratitude, which I think it was you that tweeted about that recently in response to, I think,
Ken Lowry had said
Ken
something
Lowry.
about gratitude being fundamental. And I said, could I just add humility? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think they work like this, right?
Yeah, that I think gratitude, you can't be grateful without being humble, because
Well, and you can't be humble without
realizing
you need to be thankful. So, because I mean, humble assumes that there's something above me, and that something above me is good, and so therefore I can be thankful. And grateful assumes that there's something to be thankful for, which assumes there's someone bigger than I am, which makes me humble.
Humble assumes that the person above me is worth celebrating instead of fearing. If it was worth fearing, then you could have a posture of resentment towards the above. But if it's if you're approaching with a spirit of humility, you believe that you should be grateful for the persons. The God is good all the time.
Well,
I
and
would
even
say.
if it's a person above you who is someone to be feared and is someone who is mistreating you, and I mean, this is a very controversial thing to say, and I'm only saying it within a certain frame, because I remember one job my husband had, he was at for 9 years, where his boss was extremely abusive with everybody. Um, he'd walk into a meeting and he'd just start calling people stupid to their faces, and he did this to my husband many times. And you come to a place where, for him, he felt like God hadn't released him from that job yet. Well,
Hmm.
then there's some reason that this person is above me. So then there has to be some reason that I have to be thankful that this person is above me, because God is teaching me something here, right? And sure enough, when he left that and went to the next job, all those things that he learned inside that pressure cooker were so helpful to him in the next job and in the job after that, that he wouldn't have had if he'd had somebody who had celebrated him as, oh, you're doing such a great job and thank you and everything is lovely and perfect. And he would have never had to refine all those skills upward to try to meet the demands of this very unkind person. So I know, I mean, it's a controversial thing, and I know that there are a lot of situations in which it would be toxic to say that you need to be celebrating this person above you who is abusing you. So I'm not trying to go there. I'm just saying,
I don't think you're again, I understand why there's a need for that disclaimer, but I don't think you're saying anything even borderline heretical. It's the story of Job attests to that. It's this
uh,
need to still have a posture of humility and gratitude in front of God, regardless of the circumstances. Because, like you said, in your husband's work case, those pressure, those lessons held them in good stead in a different environment, and God's got his reasons.
yeah, yeah. God has got his reasons.
I mean, that's yeah. My aunties, she was the type. Every family's got the strict auntie. That was that was the woman that raised me. She was the one that all the cousins know that you can get away with stuff, but not when mommy badon's around. She's the so she was again. She lost her older brother and her parents pretty young, so she became the mother of a younger sibling. So that sort of gave her that she that authoritarian role, and she always spoke about there would be so countless nights where there's just no hope for where the next meal was coming from, and she was very honest with the kids. As young as I was part of the conversation. Like, just tonight we don't know. We're praying. We don't know. But each time she always ends with, "But God is good," and you have to say it back all the time. And all the time, God is good. It's just that training, and in regardless of the situation, have that posture of it. So that's what that reminded me of.
You know that song? God is
Which one?
good all the time.
Yeah. The Women of Praise.
Oh, I don't know if it's Women of Praise. I used to lead worship in a small church not too far from here, and that was one of my favorite songs to do. God is good all. I'm going to put it in the information section for people, because it's such a great reminder. Yeah. This has been so great, Tyle. Can we talk again sometime?
Yes, please. I would absolutely love to. I said earlier before we started, I said to you that I had a few ideas I wanted to play with. So I would be very happy to do this again.
Oh,
Come with some
we didn't
ideas.
get to your ideas yet. Oh my gosh.
It's fine though. It's the conversation just went by. I'm looking at my notes. I was like, oh yeah, I didn't get to all this, but it's fine. I'm happy to do this again.
Okay, well, to just kind of be a cliffhanger for people, can you just elucidate a couple of the ideas briefly, and then we'll touch on them in another conversation.
All right, okay. Just really quickly, the one that I wanted to pick your brain about is was birthed from Estuary conversations that from my Manchester Estuary, which is about culture being the manifestation of the negotiation between the narrative. Let me I'll read it out. Close this for a sec. Yeah, it's so the conversation. One of people in my Estuary, we were having conversation about narratives and how different the historical accounts are just different. Each historical account comes with different narratives, and it's difficult to try to kind of pinpoint what is objectively true about history. And I said and I came to the conclusion that's what culture is. Culture is the negotiation of what the historical account will be. So just as a teaser, I want to explore that with you next time we speak.
A negotiation of the narrative accounts?
Of history. Sorry, there are too many things open and I can't find my notes.
Okay, well, anyway, we know we're going to talk about history and culture and negotiation. And
History,
maybe
culture,
before we talk, you can actually write it out for me so I can think about it.
yes, that would be great.
I did spend a few years working as a intercultural consultant, and so I have some thoughts about that.
Yes.
And also, have you ever read Eternity in Their Hearts?
No, I haven't. You buy?
I think you would really enjoy that book. And the guy that wrote it wrote another book, Peace Child, which is also a terrific book.
John Richardson, is that
Yes, yeah, these are all missionary standards. Eternity in Their Hearts. I mean, talk about narrative, the narrative of heaven touching the narrative of earth. It's really remarkable.
I can purchase it for £3, so that's being purchased right now. Lovely.
And you said before you go, you had one more thing.
Yes, just for your audience sake, meeting you in person was amazing because it was you. I know that you've got political, you were involved in politics in the past, and I was like, if you were running, I would vote for you. You're so personal, but you gave time for everyone that came to talk to you, and you engaged them in their weird ideas. I mean, at lunch one time we were talking about maths and range and base, and you was just it was just fun to play with ideas with you. So thank you.
I thought the thing that amazed me about the whole Chino conference, and I don't exactly know how to put it into words, but when we're talking on here, we can see each other clearly. It's almost 3D and all of that. And there's a certain light coming off of each person. So there's a beauty and a closeness in that. But when I met people in person, it was almost like there was a golden shimmer in the air between us. Like you could visualize the actual connection happening. It was really exciting.
Beautiful to watch, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. And I don't just mean that metaphorically. I mean, I could see like gold dust in the air between us.
Symbolism happens.
Symbolism happens. This has been so great, Tayo. You've just made my day.
Thank you so much, Karen.
We could go on for hours, but I don't think we should. Let me know another time that works for you. I'm available up until the 29th, and then we're going on a vacation, and I'll be back again mid-July.
So. Okay, I'll try to get one in before you go for vacation.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.